If this is your first time here, welcome. During our shows, we interview successful entrepreneurs and investors to spread knowledge, advice, and actionable tactics to help others in the pursuit of financial freedom. We discuss successes, failures, systems, motivations, experiences, and key lessons learned along the way in the hopes that these stories help you along your journey. Tune in every Wednesday to get your weekly juice. If you've been here before and like what you've been hearing, please subscribe, share with friends, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That goes an extremely long way for us. It's simple. Just click on your podcast app, type in our podcast name, The Weekly Juice, click on the reviews, and let us know what you think. The more ratings we get, the more eyes we'll get on our show, and in turn, we'll be able to provide you all with high-quality guests. You can also find us on Instagram at Weekly Juice Pod for daily content and personal finance tips to assist in your journey towards financial freedom. Welcome back to the Weekly Juice. Ryan and Corey here with another episode for you. Today we had an awesome guest, Andrew Kerr. He's done pretty much everything involved in real estate investing. He's bought properties, sold properties, flipped properties, dealt with evictions, invested with partners, out-of-state investing, and raised money through other people, used his own money, and he specializes in house hacking and has a podcast geared around house hacking. And honestly, he talked about like 4 or 5 different avenues of house hacking that I never even thought of that were just unconventional. So awesome episode. I think he's a great guy.
Yeah. Andrew was, he had such a really interesting story about how he got started in investing when he was 18 years old in 2002. And he kind of went through the market and actually sold off a lot of his properties that have appreciated recently. And now he syndicates. So he kind of went through this whole cycle. He's only like in his late 30s now. So he's done everything that a lot of young investors want to do, and especially the emphasis on the house hacking. But not only that, we get a little philosophical in this episode about, your legacy and why you do all this. And Andrew is he's like a philanthropist. Like he does
he gives back. He works in nonprofit.
Yeah. So it's like that's his goal. And he's just a really cool, down to earth guy. And his podcast is really good. We listen to it.
Yes. So I would say stick around to the end of the episode. That's when we get into like the philosophical, talking about time versus money. And then how Andrew will go into, he has a goal of raising $25 million through his nonprofit that he works with. So I really like this episode. I think it'll walk you through the ins and outs of investing, starting young and then working to now. So let's dive in.
Let's do it.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for joining the show today. We're super stoked to have you, and welcome to the Weekly Juice.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on, man. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while.
Absolutely. So thanks so much. If you could give our listeners just a little background on you, who you are, where you're from, and then how you transitioned into entrepreneur life.
Yeah, so I'll try to make this short. It can turn into a long story, but I was the kid in high school. The classes I liked, I got A's in, and the classes I didn't like, I got D's in. I did just enough to get by. College wasn't really in my future as much as my parents wanted it. And then I just started working at, 18, 19. I wound up in the mortgage business. By 20, I had already bought my own home and was house hacking. By 23, I was a partner in a mortgage company. And then that quarter life crisis hit, split up with the business partner, split up with a girl that I had been dating for years, and was just at that point where was making great money, but hated life. And then all of a sudden I wound up in Iowa doing disaster response work, and my life completely changed. I wasn't making any money, but I felt like I had this purpose. And that's really what sort of pushed me into real estate investing, understanding finances was, I finally had a place in life where I felt great, had a good purpose, nonprofit work's amazing, but I didn't make money. And I wanted to get back to that sort of 6-figure income. And then that's what sort of really started me going down this path of investing heavily and building up to a 40-unit real estate portfolio back in end of 2016.
Awesome. It's really cool. Thanks for sharing that story. I'm one of the things that we'll talk about as we get moving in the episode is that, your show, the House Hacking Podcast, but you touched on house hacking in your introduction there. I want to ask you at a young age, what put that idea into your head? That's it's a foreign concept to a lot of people, but to think about it at 18 or 19, it's pretty cool. So what got you going with house hacking?
Yeah. So back then, I mean, I'm about as old as you can get and still technically be a millennial. So, this was 2002 when I bought my first property, and there was really no idea of like, I want to be an investor. I want a house hack. It wasn't even coined as a term back then. But what ended up happening is I'm in the mortgage business and I'm working on these loans for folks. And me and my buddy were getting ready to go rent an apartment together. And all of a sudden I was like, whoa. They're buying a house and their payment is cheaper than what our rent's about to be. I was like, all right, we got to change this around. So that's really what spawned me to buy my first property at 20 years old.
Taking the plunge at 20 years old is a pretty cool, that's just a pretty cool way to get started. And it sets up your future. I guess.
Well, I was gonna say, I wish it set up my future. I was dumb when I was 20 years old. I mean, right. Literally the month I closed on my house, my commission check that month after taxes was like 12 grand. At the end of the month, I had nothing left, because I knew another commission check was coming. So I did something really right by buying a property, but at the same time, I was making great money and was blowing all of it at the same time. So it took a couple of years to really sort of learn from that.
Well, it's a perfect segue. So what you did something you probably didn't even realize it was as good of a thing as it was by buying the house hack. When did your mindset shift into financial independence and trying to achieve that? Because, if you spend, you had this commission check, you spent it all. So there had to be a point there where it shifted for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple points in there. So part of it was, Tim Ferriss's book, when that came out, The 4-Hour Work Week, was this sort of start of like, hey, you can look at something differently. I thought it was you just hustle and grind and you just do that till you're in your 60s and you're done. And then his idea of like taking mini retirements and building something to get additional income. And then, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that sort of started shifting it again. And then the other big shift was when sort of my life fell apart in quarter life crisis. And I ended up doing volunteer work and in the nonprofit sector. It was, I love what I'm doing, but I'm not making money. I need to go back to this idea of like the Tim Ferriss's, 4-Hour Work Week, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So it was something that, didn't happen overnight. It was sort of this evolution over a couple year period.
And you mentioned that your investment portfolio now is like, you said something about the end of 2016. So did you sell off some? You had 40 units. Oh, yeah. Did you sell off some, or what's your portfolio like at this time now?
Oh man. What had happened was I started really investing. I started rapidly scale up. I got to about 40 units. It was a mix of some single families, condos, small multifamily, but I was very heavy in low income housing and college housing. And, when I was young and single, I didn't mind working and managing properties, but by about 2016 was very serious with the woman who's now my wife, and just sort of life shifted. And, you're in the mid 30s. And I realized like people are willing to pay, double for what I bought some of these properties for. This doesn't make sense. And I didn't want to do as much work anymore. So from 2016 to 2018, essentially sold off almost everything and then reinvested it in syndication deals. That way I could still be active in real estate, but not have as much of, that sort of day-to-day stuff. And then the properties we own right now is my wife, when we were getting ready to get engaged, I convinced her to do a house hack, sort of say, you've got your money, I've got my money. If we start building this life together, why don't we look at doing a house hack? I had already done 2. You've never owned property. And then we have that was my third house hack, her first house hack. And then now the property in right now is an old historic home. It's a duplex in the Bywater area in New Orleans that we bought last year, spent about 6 months renovating it. And we're living in that now. So those are the only units that we personally own. Everything else is invested in syndications.
That's cool. That's cool. Are you right now, I guess, are you full-time real estate investing? Like you're done in the mortgage game or no?
Done in the mortgage game for years. So no, my goal was never to be full-time real estate investor. It was just to build that financial security so I could do more of what I love. And, for me, that was really the nonprofit side of we could stop and not have to ever earn any W-2 income because we've got this passive real estate income coming in to sort of cover all of our costs. In the FI community, some people call it like a barista fire or lean fire where, all your base expenses are covered. You can do a couple fun things, but you can't go crazy. And then, we can focus on the stuff we love. So now I spend most of my time doing nonprofit work.
I think a lot of people have this not a stigma, but they feel like house hacking is for the young people. Like I'm not going to do this with my wife. And I was looking the other day, I'm not married yet, but I was looking the other day and talking about the potential for me and my girlfriend to move in at some point. And I was talking about there's new construction properties we live in Philadelphia. There's new construction properties that are triplexes and duplexes, and that actually the numbers actually make sense. Can you just talk a little bit about the process of going through that with your wife, where it's like not necessarily convincing because maybe she was on board, but
there was
a lot
convincing.
of people think like, okay, or maybe, but a lot of people think like, oh, in my mid-30s, I'm not going to house hack, but you did.
Look, part of the problem and one of the many reasons why I started my podcast was to make people realize there is this stigma with house hacking. It's I'm going to live in a house and have like 5 roommates, or I have to live in this crappy building. We've got some pictures. I did a sort of a write-up case study on our third house hack. We bought this old corner store built in the 1920s in New Orleans. We converted it into 3 high-end apartments. We had an old barn building that we turned into a guest house. I mean, my wife had a 60-gallon or 70-gallon soaker jacuzzi tub, the nice white ceramic farmhouse sink, just absolutely, beautiful stuff. It took some of that. It was probably a little higher finishes than I would have done, but part of that was like, look, this is what this building can do for us. Here's what you were paying for rent. Here's what I was paying for rent. When we moved to the city, here's what we're now paying. All of a sudden, if we do this property right together, all that housing cost disappears. And we ended up making about 10 grand a year with that property. And soon as I was able to connect of like, hey, no longer spending $1,400 in rent, that's 10 to 20 grand a year to travel, which we really love. We've been to 35, 36 different countries. That just clicked. It was like, oh crap, we don't have housing costs. That's a couple awesome trips a year. So that was really what that connection is. And there's so many different ways to house hack and not have it be, sacrifice and lower your quality of life.
Super cool. I'm wondering if you could give us like an idea of maybe walk us through some of the numbers on either your current one or maybe one of your past ones. Maybe even the current one you kind of just did, but just if you could even dive a little bit deeper, because this is sparking ideas for people that they're saying to themselves, I think that, wait, I don't have to live in a house that's like a fraternity house with 10 guys. And like, that's not how it has to happen. Right.
Yeah. So what we try to do is really look at, there's 5 or 6 different types of styles. So there's that like roommate style where you get the house, the single family home, and you have a bunch of roommates. I mean, that's great if you're young and you're single and you don't mind roommates. Then there's that small multifamily, 2, 3, 4 unit type of house hacking. There's something like we call the income suite, where you've got that basement that's like a walkout basement, or that mother-in-law suite with its own private entrance. So you're still sharing a wall, but it's definitely a little bit more private. There's the ADU, accessory dwelling unit. So you got that garage that you build an apartment above or a guest house. And then you can look at that sort of live in flip. But, so our third house hack, we bought that building. I think it was like 272, 275. We put about 250 into it, and we did that via hard money plus a little of our own cash. And, when we were done, the property appraised for just over $600,000. We were bringing in enough rent between the downstairs units and the guest house that we let family and friends stay in, or we put up on Airbnb, VRBO. And we were actually, bringing in 8 to 10 grand a year on top of covering the mortgage, taxes, and insurance. The property,
did I do that math right, where you have $525,000 all in and then it prays for $600,000? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think we're about like 540 with some carrying costs, something like that. But yeah, we basically, and I have this cool write-up where I talk about like the 10 big mistakes we made with that property. We actually should have been all in at like 460 or 470, but yeah, I mean, we ended up being in it and, walking away with a nice, $50, $60 in equity that we made from renovating the building.
Beautiful. It's a really cool way to, I would love the house hack for like as long as I possibly can. I'm just thinking about it. Like if you can take that $1,500 and put it in your pocket each month. I mean, you said you've been to 35 different countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really cool.
Cool. So when you're trying to find deals, what are you specifically looking for when you're going in? You're like, all right, like I want, say you have a goal of like, I don't know, we have a goal of 6 units this year specifically. So say we were diving in and we want to look specifically for house hacks. Like what are you looking for?
Yeah. And that's where I think some people like that they think, they hear on a real estate show, it's like, oh, well, we got to add more units. If you want a house hack, I'd sort of get away from that mentality and say, all right, do I want a house hack and then turn that property into a rental? If so, then you need to follow some traditional real estate rules. If you just want to say like, I need a place to live and I'm going to house hack in it for a, 3, 5, 7 year period, it might not have to meet some of the traditional real estate investing rules. But so what I'll look at is look through the styles and see what's your lifestyle and how do they fit. So like that roommate style, are you at a place in life where you want roommates? Yes. Great. That could be a style for you. So now your criteria is I'm open to townhouses, condos, single family, and multifamily. If you say, hey, that's not for me, I don't want a roommate. I, have a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and we want privacy and we're getting more serious. Then look at that sort of small multifamily where it's like, hey, we don't mind sharing a wall or two, but, we each have our own private entrance. We don't have to see them. We could even have a property manager take care of the other part of the duplex or triplex, and the people will never know we're the owner. And then, another instance is the accessory dwelling unit. One of my really good friends and who I had on my show, Cami, they bought this big, nice single family home. And outside of it was this garage that they turned into this sort of apartment above the garage. What they would do is they live in the garage and then they put the big house on Airbnb. And then when they got, engaged and then married and then had a kid, they went back into the big house and then rented that guest house that they had built, that guest apartment, and that guest apartment always paid for the mortgage. So it's this crazy story where over this like 6-7 year period, this property transitioned with them through different phases of life. So, it was just them. They lived in the tiny, apartment, and then they got tons of cash flow, like $3-4 grand a month from renting out the big house. And then when they wanted more privacy and more space, and then their daughter was getting ready to come along, they moved back into the big house, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, and they rented the space out back. And, they didn't make profit, but it was enough to cover their mortgage. So they spent this period of like 6-7 years with zero, housing costs. And over that period of time, that property appreciated a couple $100,000. So, there's all these different ways. So I'd really say like, what's the style that fits best for you and your lifestyle? And then try to find properties that fit that.
Thank you. So I know you touched on it briefly with Corey, speaking about your specific situation with dealing with significant others. Like I think that's a big thing for a lot of people is like getting that person on board. Do you have any basic tips for someone listening to this? Be like, all right, like I'm in, I need to convince my significant other. Like how do I approach the conversation and basically like lay me out some tips that I can go back and take home?
Do you need this?
I don't. I'm good with it.
So part of this is, right, I mean, sit down and actually talk about what's important. I mean, do we need to have a big house? Do we need to drive a fancy car? I mean, so when you actually sit down and you look at, hey, what's important to us? Like what do we actually want and where do we want to be in the next 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? We had a really nice Mercedes. It sat in the garage, 90% of the year. And all of a sudden it was like, well, Do we want to have the Mercedes or do we want to spend more time traveling? So you just sit down, and when you start to look at that of like, hey, what do we really want? Okay, we want some privacy. We want, a nice bottle of wine once a week, and we want to travel. Okay, our housing never came up in that. Oh yeah, okay. So then, you can decide on it that way, is find what your values are and then try to align those. And, if you're with someone and their value and what's really important to them is to have a giant, 10,000 square foot home, more power to you. You just need to make sure you're aligned with that. So try to figure out what your values are and then focus on those. And, 90% of the time, people realize, hey, house hacking for a period of time, gives us what we want for the rest of our life.
I love that. I think right now, especially with this whole last year, people had a reset on their lives, and being at home so much, you start thinking about things that you don't think about when the cycle of life is going so fast. And so I think using those tips and just having the reset conversation of like, where do I want to be in life? Where do we want to be together? What are our goals? And like mapping out a plan to get there. I think house hacking is brilliant for people, at least specifically like young couples starting out, or young people right out of school or just getting to their jobs. But it's interesting that you've continued to do this as you've grown and you've progressed to the next stage of life. So I think it's for anyone at this point. We did a little research, and I've read that you've had your hands in everything from flipping properties, selling properties, dealing with evictions, having partners, and then investing in multiple states, and even raising money, raising private capital. Can you dive into the process of how you started raising private capital, or why you went that route as opposed to using your own money, and like how maybe a new investor can get involved in that without getting too scared?
Yeah. So I'll sort of give you my little story and some takeaways from it. So what happened was I basically ran out of money, right? Like I was buying property, I'd saving up money for down payment, buy property, save up money, buy property, save up money, buy property. And then all of a sudden I was like, man, I can't buy any more properties. And then my buddy, he was like, hey, my dad said you've been doing this real estate thing and you're buying all these properties. That's pretty cool. And he had actually just gotten out of the Army and then went to be a private contractor, and then was back overseas for 11 months. And he goes, I went from making $30,000 a year to like $250,000 a year. And I just spent 11 months overseas and I couldn't spend any of it. So I want to do that real estate thing with you. I'm going to go back overseas again for another contract, but like, can we start investing together? So part of it was just very simple of I quietly did great things, built the real estate portfolio. I'd share it. I wouldn't do the flex and the brag and all that crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden he was like, man, you've started building that up. That's cool. Can I do that with you? And then what ended up happening is his dad invested because he saw the track record, what we were doing. And then that track record of those two helped me raise more money. So someone is just starting with someone that's close to you that has some capital they can partner with. So maybe they don't have the time and the energy and the experience, but they got the capital, and then use that and do a really great job to start to build a track record, and then go out to that next set of people in your circle. Say, look, I actually have a track record. I'm doing a deal. Here's what type of returns we could get. Can you partner with me? And just, go from there, little steps at a time, and build off your track record.
Love that.
It's awesome. You got one.
I got
He was like, you're not
really quick, because it's on this topic.
Do it.
So are you only using private money for BRRRR deals or flips? And is it possible, because we get this question a lot and I'd rather hear it from an expert, can you, for a buy and hold deal that you're just going to put 20% down or whatever percent down, can you get a private money lender or a partner in a type of deal like that? Or does it not make sense at all?
Yeah. So I guess I'll ask the second question, then we'll go back to the other one. So, if you're going to go buy a home that you're, say, like house hacking, and you're getting traditional financing, you can't really take the private money for the down payment portion because you'd be violating some of those loan terms. But, if you're going to do really any type of deal, you could get private money outside of that where, if you think of it from an investor, like what's in it for them of, hey, I am securing this money. I'm loaning it to you, and it's secured against a asset, a property. So if you default, I'm taking this property and I'm going to get a set rate of return. and there's this whole batch of folks, baby boomers that are retiring. They don't want their money in the stock market. And, in a bond, they're getting 2, 3, 4, 5%, and annuities that 4, 5, 6%. So if you can come back and say, look, do you want steady payments over the next 5 years? How about steady payments at 6%? And we're going to secure your collateral, this property right here. And folks really love that. And then as far as the type of money that I use, it's whatever's the easiest and cheapest and will give me the most advantage at the time. So, when we did that third house hack with my wife and I, we used hard money, partly because the property needed a ton of work. And I didn't want the size of it, we're buying at 270 and then putting in another $250,000. That's a lot for a single person to lend out private money. And then after that hard money was done and we did the renovations, we refinanced out. This fourth house hack, which is my wife's second house hack, we used FHA loan. I mean, we bought it. We only wanted to put the 3.5% down because we had to put $100,000 of work into it. So it was either, do we put more money down or get private money? And then we use some of our capital, or we put a lot down, then we got to borrow some capital to renovate it. So we just said, let's do the FHA loan, 3.5% down, use our capital to do the renovations. Then we refinanced out and then add an equity line and got all our capital back.
That's a nice strategy, which I think is important to touch on. It's like, instead of you two going 50-50 on one house hack, you, I'm guessing, took the loan out under your name for the one, and then your wife did it for the next one. So that way you're kind of, I don't know, we've always heard there's a limit to the amount of loans you can take out, or the banks will look at you differently. Is any truth to that?
Yeah, there is. So, traditional banks for conventional finance, and they'll either limit you at 4 loans or 10 loans. Right now we actually don't split the loans between my wife and I. We just put them all in my name because, she doesn't work. She doesn't have any income. So she wouldn't be able to qualify for that traditional loan. So when we do loans in our name, we just, put them in mine, and she's on the deed of the house. If we do private money and stuff like that, sometimes they'll ask for, different levels of guarantees.
Cool. I think your story is really interesting because this is like a real perseverance game too. You're buying your first property in 2002. And you went through this, and you went through the market cycle. Like you're going, 2008, 9, 10, and 8 and 9, or 7 and 8 were not pretty for real estate investors. And then, so you've gone
wasn't
through
pretty for any investor.
Yeah, exactly. Not any investor, like you said. So, but you went through the buying, the ups, the downs, and then the selling. Can you talk a little bit about your experience specifically with Hurricane Zeta? Because I think when a lot of people get into real estate investing, their biggest fear is like, something's going to happen to my house. Like some bad things are going to happen, whether it's the market or a war or a pandemic or weather. So you've been through it and you survived. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So where most people get hurt is they try to do an appreciation only play. They'll say, hey, this property is not going to cash flow at all, or has, negative cash flow. And then, but, I think the properties can go up 20% a year just based on the market. And that's where they tend to get hurt. So like the way my approach is, I like to buy property that's beat up, needs some love, because I know if I fix it up and I'm buying a property that needs that love, I can force the appreciation. I can make the property go up 25, 50, 100 grand in a short period of time. And that gives me a lot of cushion over a loan or any money I have invested. And then I like the property to be able to cash flow well. And then you get good insurance, and then you have reserves. So, we had Hurricane Zeta come through. I mean, literally we had finished renovating this house, like new roof, whole deal, right? Back in April, May, moved in, Hurricane Zeta comes through. There must have been on a piece of the flashing, one nail or one screw that didn't get all the way quite in. And then, that 110, 120 mile per hour winds, going nonstop was enough to pull it up. With sideway rain, all of a sudden we just start hearing it dripping in our bedroom, and water started coming through the ceiling. It wasn't super bad, put a little hole in the ceiling so the water could come through. We put a bucket in, cleaned it up. wasn't an issue. We let it dry out, got a roofer to come by, fix the flashing. We didn't even need to call the insurance. It was so small, but it sucked that it happened. It was a little nerve wracking at night, but my wife and I were like, okay, not really an issue. Easy to manage. We've got money in reserve set aside. We can get this fixed up. But even if it was horrible, we had more than enough reserves to start paying for the repairs while we waited for the insurance to come in. And we made sure we've got, the good insurance, flood, we've got the wind and hail that you need. So, all in all, bad things are going to happen, build reserves, protect for your downside, and get good insurance. And, most of the time you're fine.
The great point you're making there is not to over leverage too. I think that's 100%. The biggest thing is if you do this and you have a criteria that's set, your ways. Ryan and I talked about this the other day. I'm like the speed guy. I'm like, we got to go. Right. And he is too, to an extent, but we're like, we have to have 6 months of reserves in a bank account or we're not purchasing it. Now we're probably going to use other people's money coming up. So it'll end up working out. But if we're spending our own money, we are not going past this threshold. And we've seen it with $5,000 of capital expenditures in this new property we just bought within the first 3 months. If we don't have the reserves, you're losing your shirt. And then you turn your mindset around on real estate and you say, this game sucks. I hate this. When in fact, it's like the exact opposite. As long as you play it smart, right?
You're very right. You need some sort of reserves for those unexpected things. Also, it depends on where you're at in life too. And I don't want anyone to go like super crazy, but I took way more risk in my 20s than I did in my early 30s than now that I'm married. My wife is very conservative in her risk tolerance, right? So I would probably be a little bit more leveraged than she would prefer, but even then,
keeps you grounded.
Yeah, what I would do for leverage, a lot of folks would be like, that's way too conservative. Like we're at a point now where we don't want that much risk. I'd rather take a lower return and have way less risk. Where when I was in my 20s, it was no problem. Like I can be a bit more risky because it's just me. I'm only risking my money. I'm not risking other people's money. If something happens to me, there's not people that are dependent on me. So you can and this is why I love real estate. It can change with you over life and how you invest. Like I started in low income college housing, now the buildings that we own are $500,000 plus buildings and we invest in syndication. So, it's a great way to build wealth and the way you invest can change over time.
Do you have, like a blueprint of your reserves or exactly like what are your numbers a month that you're like this, not per month, but per property? Like we want to have X amount so that it's just like sitting there ready to go in case something happens.
Yeah. Now it's, I don't even really worry about it. We have enough income from real estate plus other assets and that we've got enough cash flow from all the different things where we can have one or two income streams cut off and we have the other income streams covering. We also have, a nice pool in a property reserve, but we have money in a brokerage account we can pull in emergency situations. So it doesn't make sense to sit on too much cash. When I started out,
if you were to give that advice to, if like when you were 25, maybe what do you think that would look like?
My rule of thumb was first get to $1,000, then get to the insurance deductible. A lot of times that's $2,500 or $5,000. And then it was get to 3 months of the mortgage payment. And then that was what I kept, 3 months of mortgage payment. But that was my sort of, oh shit money. I also had a capital reserve account. So if that roof was going to cost 10 grand and there's only 10 years left, I'd put $1,000 aside for that year in the CapEx account. And that was on top of those 3 months worth of payments.
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah.
I really like
cool.
that.
We currently want to do 6 months of, we're pretty conservative. So we want to do 6 months of the mortgage. Now our homes our properties they're not necessarily low income. I'd say they're like C plus neighborhoods, but they're in that range where they're going to cash flow and not appreciate as much as our primary residences. So I'm with you on that.
Can you talk about evictions? And I know you've been through a bunch of these, and I've heard from reading is that you haven't had to really deal with the legal system. Like you've done it yourself. So I'm not sure if I'm off on that. Can you just walk us through a couple scenarios? Like people are very afraid when they hear like, ooh,
your tenants aren't going to pay.
They're not going to pay. Like, how do I evict someone? Why do I evict someone? And like, can I even do it by myself or do I have to hire out? So I know there's a lot there, but if you could dive in.
Yeah. So couple things. So most of the tenants I actually had to evict, I inherited, but if you do your screening right, yep, that will eliminate, 95% of the headache, also depending on the asset class. So, in A or B asset class, you traditionally have less evictions than like a C or a D, just sort of the way it is. The other thing, it's going to vary depending on your county and your state, but like a lot of the evictions I did were back in North Carolina. You could do the first passive eviction on your own. If someone appealed, then if it was in your name, you could do it. But if it was in an LLC, you have to hire a lawyer. There's some states where you can't do it at all. If it's an LLC, even at the first level, you have to hire a lawyer. So, there's this whole other debate about LLCs or no LLCs. That's one of the downsides. But the process was pretty simple. I would have ironclad leases. I would follow the law. So they missed the payment. Even if I was going to be a nice guy and they said, hey, it's the first, I don't get paid till the 5th. I'd say, okay, great. It's the 2nd. Here's your late notice. I deliver the late notice right away. If you pay by the 5th, that's fine. But if you don't pay by the 10th, I'm filing eviction. If they came by the 5th, no problem. I'd waive the late fee, help them out. No big deal. But I would immediately, as soon as they were late, very first day they were late, I would give them the pay or quit notice. You have to look up for your state. Some states it's 3, some 5, some 10. And then once that period was over and they didn't pay, you could then go file for an eviction at court. And it was like this 2-page document said, why are you evicting them? They didn't pay rent. Don't try to make it overcomplicate. Say, oh, they're mean and, they party too much. It was, they didn't pay rent. Did you deliver the notice? Yes. I'd put a copy of it in there. What's their address? What's your contact information? I'd go, they'd stamp it. I'd pay the $100-some fee. And they say, great, well, your court date's here. Take this, go to the sheriff. They'll deliver the notice about the court date. We'd show up at court. They'd give the judge this crazy sob story. Oh, he's mean and we don't like him. And, oh, we're mad. He fixed up the building and, I had a hard time and my car broke down or, whatever the story was. And then judge would turn to me and I'd say, they didn't pay rent. Here's the notice, copy of the notice I gave them on the 2nd. Here's when we filed the eviction. You have the notice that the sheriff went out and delivered it to them. And then he'd turn back and say, y'all didn't pay. And they'd go, okay. And story. And he'd turn back and say, great, you won. Sheriff will pull them out, in another week. So it was a really simple process where you just have an ironclad lease and then you follow the law. And first time I did it, I was very nervous. But after that, I did 20 plus evictions and all of those were from my affordable housing C-class properties.
It's great. I wish it was like that in the Northeast. You get I don't know if it's just in Jersey, but I don't think it's nearly that easy. It's a little bit more of a tenant friendly state.
One of the things you really want to look at, obviously if you're in a state, that's what you're going to invest in. But if you ever start to do out of state investing, that's one of the rules that I look at first. Is it a tenant friendly state or a landlord friendly state? And this doesn't mean be unethical and unmoral, but there's some states out there, like you can't actually file for eviction for like 45 days. And judges will be like, oh, they didn't pay. You should be a nice guy and, eat it for another 60 days. It's just absolutely crazy.
It's true. I have a bunch of family in Massachusetts and it's just not an investor friendly state. It's very tenant friendly. And so some of them are starting to look in Rhode Island because it's like, right, it's closer and it's much more friendly for the investor. We've been going back and forth on this. So for your late notices, say you send it on the 2nd, do you do that every single month or is that after like multiple times of this tenant not paying their rent or
every time, right? So, like if you're late on the 1st and not paid, I'm delivering it right away. Now, if a tenant hasn't been paying, if they consistently pay late, you just sort of have to decide. That was part of why I got out of affordable housing. But, what I found with affordable housing, most folks, I mean, this is most folks in the US, not just affordable housing, live paycheck to paycheck. And if their paycheck is coming every other Friday, you know, and it's never going to line up exactly on the first, and they never have enough of a buffer to get ahead where, you know, like we're paying our mortgages, you know, on the 20th and it's not due till the first. With that sort of tenant class, they can never really get ahead where they're able to pay. So I would still deliver the notice on the second, and they would always pay the third, the fourth, the fifth. It just had to fall on that payday Friday or payday Monday.
Our leases are 5-day grace period though. So like, it's not late till the 6th. That's the difference between like Andrew's talking about late on the 2nd, where ours technically isn't late till the 6th, but it's just different, you know, different leases, different states and stuff. I think it's really cool advice. I kind of want to transition to your podcast a little bit, and Fi by REI, and just the inception of your blog, and what were you looking to accomplish with the blog, and why did you start it, and what gave you the idea, I guess? Yeah.
So the blog was whole thing of people just saying like, Andrew, you got some crazy stories of like property fires, evictions, like SWAT teams raiding a property.
We're going to have to dive into one of those right now.
Contract on, like you should document this. And I'm like, I don't like writing, but I was like, all right, I'll start a blog. I'll just put some stories up there. And then it just started growing. Like, you know, I think I bought the domain in 2017 or beginning of 2018, just started putting up a couple of little things. And then, you know, 2019, I started putting more effort into it. Next thing I know, I was like, oh man, there's a couple of thousand people reading this a month. And then, you know, in 2019, it just kept growing and growing. And along this period of, you know, even outside of the blog, people would ask like, how can I get started in real estate investing? Or, hey, how can I get ahead financially? And my answer was always, do a house hack. Even if you don't want to be a real estate investor, do a house hack for 3 to 5 years to pay off your student loan, to sock money away for retirement, just to change your financial position, then go back to living like everyone else in a traditional home. So it was always house hacking, house hacking, house hacking. I wrote a couple articles, an ultimate guide about it, but people just kept asking for more and more. So then we started doing case studies. I think we're coming up on our 50th written case study on house hackers. So we've got like 50 different written examples. And then with that was the podcast, where people are like, we love these stories. We love these case study series. Like, you should do a show so we can like really get the people's personalities. And then we launched the show, I think it was December 30th, 2019. And, you know, we've been rolling since then. And I mean, it's been a crazy, crazy experience. I mean, we've had people that have used house hacking to travel around the world. You know, someone was just super open and vulnerable with us and talked about how she did house hacking, and that helped her get started in real estate investing to give her a financial cushion to help cover her breast cancer treatment. I mean, it's just, you know, so many amazing things have come out of house hacking for all these different folks, from single folks to couples just starting a life together to, you know, married families with kids. So it was really just, people were asking how to do it and the easiest way to get started. And it was house hacking. And then it developed into a show to sort of say, hey, there's more than this. I just got to like sacrifice and have 5 roommates type of house hack. Like, there's so many different other options out there.
Yeah, I think you opened our eyes to a couple other house hacking avenues that I just hadn't thought of before. I know the blog is founded on like 4 main pillars: book smart, street smart, financial foundation, and then fun. Can you dive into each of those and like what they mean to you?
Yeah. So, you know, the book smarts is like, you know, the 4% safe withdrawal rule. If y'all have ever talked about it on that your show, or a lot of folks hear about the 1% rule in real estate investing. To me, that's the book smarts, right? It's like, here's a formula, and here's how it's done in best practice. But that only gets you so far. So the idea with the street smarts was, hey, here's actual case studies. You know, here's my write-ups of some of my experience to see how it actually works out, or how that rule didn't quite work, or it never try to sort of goes like it's supposed to. And then, you know, you got to have your financial foundation. You can start to invest and you can start to do house hacking or real estate if your financial situation isn't perfect. But, you know, you look at lottery winners, you know, most of them end up bankrupt. It's because they don't have that financial foundation set. And then, the fun part is, this is what life's about, right? Is to go enjoy life with the people that you care about when you want to do it. And like for my wife and I, our biggest thing is travel. And it's those other pillars that help let us do, those fun things. So like we have a goal of joining the Travelers Century Club, which is you get when you visited 100 countries. So that's sort of the fun side of it. And then we throw in some other fun articles about how to use like credit card rewards with real estate investing. So you then can go do some fun things and have other people pay for it. So those are sort of the 4 pillars and how we try to break down the different articles on the website.
Love that.
The fun thing is so important, like maybe the most important, because we always say that your why drives you to do this. I think about sometimes when days are long and you're because we're in the growth phase, right? We're in our late 20s, early 30s, and we're in our growth phase. So we know that this is a grind, but we're trying to build this life that we can live it on our own terms. And I think that your why and the fun, you have to kind of remember that some days, I'm sure. So he's
got the pictures behind him for all the places he's gone.
Yeah, it's super cool. I can't wait to start traveling soon, right? So
yeah. I mean, and if some of your folks want to like learn about the different styles of house hacking, we put together this quick start guide, and I did a little short link for y'all folks. It's fibyria.com/weeklyjuice.
Awesome.
And they can download that quick start guide, and it goes through the 6 main different styles of house hacking and gives them a little bit of background on it. That way, if they're interested in it, they can check it out.
That's perfect. That's great. I think, we're kind of winding down a little bit. I wanted you mentioned the SWAT and the fire. Whatever story comes to mind first. I want to hear.
I need the SWAT.
Yeah, I want to hear the SWAT team one, because I think it's like this is something that people can freak out about. But look, you made it through, so it's great.
Wow, the way I reacted, y'all will love this. So there's this property. I was in this period of affordable housing. I was trying to buy up this whole neighborhood. And at the peak, I was owning, I think, 16 or 17% of the neighborhood. And as soon as you come in, there's 2 properties. And there's one I just been watching over the period of time. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I found out, the owner ignored my letters, and I tried to look them up online on like social media, nothing. And then I came across the property manager and just became friends with the property manager. And the property manager was pissed because the owner wouldn't spend any money. And as a property deteriorated, the property manager, it was harder to rent. So like the quality of the tenants kept going down and down and down. And finally, the property manager told the owner, like, hey, screw you. I'm dropping you, and no one else is going to do this. But if you want to sell, this guy, Andrew, will buy the property. And he helped negotiate this deal for us. There's tons of issues. There's a hoarder. There's people selling drugs out of one unit. And I was like, this is a problem. I love problems, because if we can solve problems, we make good money. So I was already getting a killer deal on it. And then we're, getting ready to do the due diligence. And all of a sudden, like, SWAT goes in and like kicks in the door, and like the door's off the hinges. And I just happened to be like over at one of my other buildings in the neighborhood. And I got so excited. I was like, man, I'm going to get a super killer price break because of this. And that's literally what we did, is we went back and we were like, look, your building's crap, and the doors just got knocked off the hinges. I can walk away right now and no one is going to pick this up from you. And, we got another price break on it. And then I also put into that contract where he had to evict those tenants before we close. So that way I didn't have to manage that process.
Huge move. Huge move on that. I'm hearing, wow, hoarding situation, SWAT team. Like, yeah, you did good with the discount there. You're on basically your own episode of Cops. I would have been driving close, but like, this is almost mine. Like, let me check this thing out. Yeah, that's incredible.
Super cool.
So we're transitioning to our favorite part of the show. It's called the Core Four.
Is our favorite?
It's my favorite.
Let's go.
That's right. It's cool. It's a little bit more personal. Like our listeners get to know you a bit. We get to know you a bit more. So,
love it.
4 questions about you. The first one's pretty easy. And it's, what's your favorite investing or business book and why?
Oh man, very cliche, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And then, The Richest Man in Babylon. I love that one. It's such an easy read, that like story fable. So probably, Richest Man in Babylon.
Cool. I really like that one too. Sometimes it's hard to, we ask for book recommendations and you get business investing, and they're very like getting through the book. It's amazing information, right? But it's just so hard to just
apply it, right?
How do you apply it right away? I'm finding myself on Word, typing in notes, building outlines for the whole book so I can take it and put it in our business plan. But The Richest Man in Babylon, I tossed that in an audiobook, and it's just phenomenal. That and The Alchemist, those are kind of two. And they're just the beginning books along with Rich Dad Poor Dad that just they change your mindset. And I just think phenomenal recommendation. I love that book.
Yeah, the one I'm actually reading right now that's pretty good is one of the Russell Brunson's books on website traffic and funnels and stuff like that, and it's pretty phenomenal. But that's one of those books where like I'm taking notes every page I read, and it takes forever to get through it because like there's all these notes you're taking.
I know.
Richest Man in Babylon, it's just great story.
It flows and it's nice. Yeah, you're not doing a book report on that one for sure.
Cool. Our second question of the core four is, what is your biggest mistake been over your investing career, and how have you learned from it?
Yeah, it'd be my period of my late teens and early 20s where I didn't save. I mean, that's really my biggest financial.
Yeah, but who does at that time?
Mistake.
Like, that's not even a mistake. That's just like being 18.
I know. I wish I could go back and smack myself. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest ones there. And then, something that I obviously have gotten really better at, but I was really bad at building in contingency to my renovation budget. And, earlier in my investing career, that caused some stressful nights and some stressful times where you would get tight on cash, or you didn't want to go back to an investor and say like, oh, this thing came up, or I forgot about this. And, we need an extra $5,000 or $10,000. So that was probably one of the consistent things I did wrong early on, was not building a big enough contingency.
Cool. So third question is an interesting take on driving your business forward. So the question is, who is your who for 2021? And by meeting this person, you feel that your business or life will be propelled to the next level. And if you don't have someone in mind that you're like, I'm not really sure who I'd meet, like who is someone that you've met along your journey that has removed you from one spot and your trajectory just shot up?
Yeah, so this is an easy one. Peter Shallard. So he started this company called Commit Action. I actually think he's based in the UK, but he is this sort of like business psychologist, and he started this company called Commit Action, where they really help entrepreneurs focus on high level stuff, working on your business instead of in your business. And I've been working with one of his folks for 60 days now, and it's phenomenal. So I would actually love to meet him. He's the CEO of that company.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Our last question of the core four is, what do you want your legacy to be? And the reason why we ask this question, it's kind of a deep question, but the reason why we ask is we kind of point back to the why. Why you do this all the time. What is the point, really? What is the point of investing for 20 years? And what do you want your legacy to be when you're gone?
Yeah. So the short-term sort of legacy and goal was, we've got this objective to raise $25 million for charity. I need to update my numbers. But one of the things when I started in the nonprofit sector, I realized I'm good on the sales side of things, where going and swinging a hammer is fairly replaceable, but not everyone is comfortable sitting down with a millionaire or a billionaire and going through a conversation and getting them to invest in social good. And that was something I found I'm very successful at. So I sort of put this goal out there of, I'd feel good about my life if I raised $25 million for charity. And then in the long term, we want to die and essentially leave everything to charity and have a really great family foundation set up that's able to give to charity for, 100 years past when we're dead.
Incredible. You were ready for this question.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Well, it's something that just happens over time, right? I mean, when you start to realize like life isn't about just me, it's about my family, my friends, the people I care with. And then you start to realize, hey, there's more people out there. And part of it was with the aid work I've done. Like you go to a place like Haiti and you come back and like you go through the drive-through and drop $20 and you're like, man, people live off of $20 for a whole year. Like my life isn't that bad anymore. And that just sort of helps drive the why.
It's incredible perspective and so important perspective too, because you can get lost in that in only caring about yourself when you're doing all of this. And I sometimes think to myself, I'm like, I got to take a step back. My business is working, things are going well. I got to appreciate that, but also appreciate the position that I'm in just in general. So it's really cool.
You always start thinking of like once you check off pretty big milestones, like you got the house, you have the car, you have the wife, you've done the vacations, and relatively early age, it doesn't really matter what age, but you're like, why am I here? Like I've done things that people have not done in their entire lives. And like, it's my turn to give back. Like, specifically for me, like I always think about people that have student loans. Like I manage a sales team, and like some of these kids have student loans and they're paying off these bills. And I was fortunate enough to not to have that. And like, I'm not only trying to teach them and how to sell and retain for our business, but also I kind of find it now as my goal and my like, not my goal, but it's almost like my duty to teach them what I didn't learn in college and how to set them up, and like my struggles for the first 5 years out of school, what I wish I saved on, what I wish I invested in, and what I wish I did sooner. And the podcast has kind of brought that to light a little bit for us. It's held us accountable, but it's also made me reflect and realize how much I have been privileged compared to a lot of people. And it's my duty now to give back and help elevate the team as a whole, as people. Not to get too much into my legacy, but it's interesting. We talked about that today, in a development huddle I had, and it's important. I really think it is.
Well, look at like people that are ultra famous rock stars. Most of them die like depression, suicide, drug overdoses. And from the outside, it looks like they have everything. They're famous. They can go anywhere, do anything. They've got money, but they're unhappy. And, everyone has ups and downs and can struggle with depression, but if you're always focused on the grind and the hustle and not taking time to enjoy life and have fun and help others, I mean, life really is about giving in some capacity, and, giving can be different for everyone else.
Super cool. I think it was Chad Carson who we had on our show, who we've kind of developed a little relationship with, who I like looked up to Chad just 3 or 4 years ago, and even getting to talk to him was like a little, like
he was starstruck.
Yeah. So like
we had him as the launch guest for the house hacking podcast.
Oh yeah. It's all, so like
Chad's awesome. Such a nice guy, man.
Oh, he's the best.
I love him. Yeah.
He's the best. He said something like the taking mini hiatuses or mini vacations or mini retirements. And that to me was like, I have to put this or celebrate my victories. I have to do that. Not to go back to myself, but it's more so like you put yourself, you do something and you accomplish something. Now you can take this time and enjoy it and also give back. So I don't know.
I think it's important. We talked about that briefly in here. It's like we're in the cycle, right? And you can see success and what other people think. What we don't feel as successful. Some people look at us or look at investors and you specifically is like, they're like, holy crap, how has he done this much in this amount of time in his life? Where people get the idea, they study stuff and then they never take any action. Like that's one point, but it's also the point of we need to start. I think what the world doesn't do enough of is like reflect and see how far you've come. We just keep chugging along. Oh, here's 2021. Here's my new goals. Like, did you actually accomplish the goals from last year?
Yeah.
Did you celebrate them and share them with people? So it's just a funny take where I think we're accustomed. Maybe it's, I don't know if it's everybody in the world, but I just think like Northeast, we're like chug, like go along. And then I lived in California for a little bit and they were so chill. And I'm like, they're like, it was like a different mindset. Like there's people out there that are not doing and going as crazy as I am. And so it just makes you think about life in general and like what's right and wrong.
Well, that's my big gripe with the real estate investing community is we only pick success is the person that has 100 units or 500 units or 1,000 units. And then all of a sudden when you're like, I started as like, I got to get to 10, then I got to get to 20, then I got to get to 30. And then all of a sudden I was like, I actually don't need 100 units to have a great life.
So we just figured this out for ourselves.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, isn't that crazy? Like the mentality, and I get, you got to have like clicky titles that draw people in, but like, if we're always shooting of like, we got to be this giant thing, it's like, you can have a killer life and only, need to get this far. And then why take on all that burden of having to manage this whole giant business? And I mean, if that's for you, do it. But like most people don't even need that giant of success to be able to enjoy a really awesome life.
Talk about certain millionaires and I mean, there's millionaires in different sectors, but I just think of like people owning big conglomerates and big companies, and they're still in it, right? They're like, their time is consumed by this business that they have to keep managing people, and
they're still on the treadmill.
They're still on the treadmill. Yeah. They have all this money. What are their expenses? They're also taking care of 500 people in the company and making sure those people's bills get paid because they need to make sure their salary is fulfilled. So it goes back to the conversation about time, right? And it's like, what do you want your life to be based on time? Like money can't provide you with happiness. It can provide you with things with options, right? It pays your bills and sets you up for things you want to do. But I think the thing that we can't get back that we always focus on, and that should be the number one topic of conversation, is like, is that worth your time? And how can you find a strategic number of units or properties that have a specific amount of cash flow and they take care of your bills, and then work is optional? And like, that's kind of the basics of how we, people, when they ask us for advice, like we do talk house hacking first, and then we talk about how many properties specifically do you need to cover your expenses, and there's financial independence from there. And then what do you really want to do? What can you go explore and maybe find a little bit more happiness? So
yeah,
cool. The last that was a great talk, by the way. I love talking about.
I know. I felt like that was the longest third question, but it's so awesome.
The most fun.
The philosophy behind that is just like gets me going. So the last segment of our show is called The Last Drop, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self if you could go back and do things differently?
Yeah, definitely save and invest more, man. Don't blow all that money.
Yeah. Cool.
Easy enough. Yeah. Start early.
This has been awesome. We really appreciate your time. We respect it. If people found value, they want to hear more about you, they want to get in touch, how can people learn more about you? What's the best way to learn more about Andrew?
Yeah, if you want to check out the podcast, I mean, we're in everywhere. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. It's the House Hacking Podcast. And then the website's FIBYREI.com. And if you do that /weekly juice, you can go get that house hacking quick start guide if house hacking is something you're interested in.
Love it. I hope more people house hack. Gives them freedom. So well, man, when COVID's over, guys, come down to New Orleans. Beers, beignets, coffee is on me.
I've never been. I've never been to New Orleans either. You can lock that up.
I've never been. Yeah,
we've talked.
We can talk philosophy and life for hours over drinks. So it's gonna be fun.
Send us over the scotch you like, and we'll make sure we'll bring it down for you.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah.